Hi, this is Henning from FlippedNormals.com, and in this video you are going to learn how to light in Maya. We are going to be covering all the common light types, and by the end of this you are going to be pretty comfortable with the different kinds of lights. Before we get into that, make sure to check out FlippedNormals.com if you want really high quality tutorials and assets for basically all 3D software, including Maya, Blender, ZBrush, and tons more. We also have really high quality tutorials like Introduction to Anatomy that we released fairly recently, covering how to sculpt high quality anatomy, how to go through all the main muscles, bony landmarks, all the kind of stuff that you need to know to get started with anatomy. So to create lights in Maya, you can go to Create and Lights, and then we're just going to be docking this menu. We also have them under Arnold, Lights, and we have a different set of lights here. So some of these are kind of the same and some of these are not, but in general you need both of these menus. This is where Maya is a little bit inconsistent because you have old school Maya lights and then you have new school, I suppose, Arnold lights right here. So we are going to be starting off with the directional light, which is this one here. This is the light you want to use if you are emulating something like sunlight. The unique thing about the directional light is that the position truly doesn't matter. So if we start to just enable this here so it will render, then you can see here that if we move this light around, nothing will change. You can see, of course, it resets a render and such because there are changes to the scene, but the light looks exactly the same, the render looks exactly the same, the scale doesn't matter, nothing else matters apart from the rotation. And the way this light works is that all the rays are parallel, like you can see here in the gizmo here as well, that everything is just parallel. And this is how the sunlight works. Obviously, the way the sun works from a physical point of view is that it's a ball of light, but it's so far away that from all practical purposes, sunlight is just parallel. There is no way that you're going to see any kind of non-parallel rays from the sun just because it's so far away. So the only thing that matters here is the rotation. So you can just place this, fairly middle in the scene and then just rotate this around. So let's have a look at some of the settings. We can find all the settings for all the lights under the attribute editor. Some of these are going to be mostly up here, or in some of these and some settings are going to be lying under Arnold. This depends on what kind of light it is. If the light comes from the lights menu, the first one here, or the create lights, then it's going to be on the top. And if it's from the Arnold menu, this is going to be unified. But regardless, we have an Arnold menu for both of these. And this is really the menu we're going to be sticking to the most. The first one here is color temperature. This is where you can just choose the actual temperature of the light. This is using Kelvin. So if you know anything about Kelvin, this means that higher values are colder and lower values are warmer. So if you want something really warm, you can go in here. But what if you want a specific color for this? Well, you just disable the color temperature and then you go up to the color and then you just choose this color here. So you can pick exactly the kind of color you want for your light. So pretty nice and simple. We're just going to make this light white. Then instead of using intensity like you normally would in a lot of 3D software, I recommend that you use exposure. This is a different way of lighting and there are some benefits to this. In a lot of rendering software, you can see the light intensity as some kind of abstract number. It's just going to be like 3,200 or something. And then if you want to increase it, you just increase the number. And that's fine in the sense that higher numbers are going to be brighter, but exposure is a very practical approach to it. And all the lights Arnold are going to be using exposure at least as an option. You can just, of course, use intensity. But from a practical lighting point of view, exposure means that if you set this to 1, and this is now a certain brightness. Now set this to 2, it's going to be twice as bright. 3 is going to be twice as bright as 2. 4 is going to be twice as bright as 3. So this is kind of how it will work on a real set where you work in stops. You work with real cameras and such. We're going to be talking about stops. And stops just means one stop up means make it twice as bright, one stop down, make it half as bright. So this is a very practical way. So if, for instance, now if we were to set this to 8, it's not going to be twice as bright as 4. It's going to be a lot brighter than that. Because now you can see that it will be 5 will be twice as bright as 4, 6 will be twice as bright as that, so it becomes exponential. So if this is like 14, this is going to be insane. So this is a very practical way of working because it means the feedback you're going to be getting from a DP or somebody who's giving you feedback on it might just be, yeah, make it a stop brighter, and you're like, got it, sir, and you just make it twice as bright. Or if they were like, make it a stop darker, you're like, got it. This becomes a lot easier from a practical lighting point of view, instead of, can you reduce it by 3000 units? So it's just twice as bright or half the brightness. Another thing we have to talk about for the directional light is the angle. This is just going to be how soft the shadows are. So you can see here, this is just making this softer or blurrier. If you're going for a sunlight, you want this to be pretty sharp. You don't want it to be 100% sharp because that's going to look weird, but you want this to stay very sharp because the sun is so powerful and the rays are so parallel. But this of course changes. For instance, if you want to make this a bit of more of an overcast day, you can also just change this a little bit like so, because sometimes the sun isn't fully direct. There might be a little bit of haze or some clouds that goes through. So there is that. Then we have the samples. Samples is something all lights in Arnold are going to be having, and I recommend just setting this to 3. If you set this number too low, it's going to be difficult to remove the noise, because then you're going to have to increase the general camera anti-aliasing up here. So I recommend just sticking this to 3, just as a nice rule of thumb. That's going to work in nearly all cases. We're not really going to go into sampling in this video. That's a whole different topic, but setting this to 3, all good. And that's it for the directional light. Next, we have the point light. The point light is a light you'd be using if you want to emulate something like a light bulb, where it's just a point in space and it goes out from that at an even amount from this one point. Like with the directional light, we have this under Arnold as well here, and we can just choose the color temperature and exposure and such. So we can set this to something like 5, and you can see what happens now. So if you move this light around, you can just start to see that this behaves like a point light. Like with the other ones, we also have samples as well. Just set this to 3, and the radius as well is going to indicate how large this light actually is like. So if we were to move it close to his head now, maybe close to his arm, you can more easily see this, because I actually snap it to this. Just hold on the V key so we can snap it, move it a little bit out. So if this gets if the radius gets too large, it's going to actually like eat into the arm. So you can see here, right, it actually goes into the arm because it's just too large. But at the same time, what you can also see is, if you notice down here, the shadows get softer. So the larger the radius, the softer the shadows. So this would just be, from a purely physical point of view, it would kind of make sense. If you had one light that was really tiny, then you would have shadows be really, really, really sharp. But if you had a light that was bigger, there would be a lot more softness to the light in general. You can think about this if you have just a regular lamp and there is no like lamp shade on it. The shadows are going to be much, much, much harsher than if you were to have a large lampshade on top of it. Something you can also do on all lights is you can go under visibility, and then you can change what they're visible in. You can, for instance, change the diffuse. You can change the specularity, so now you can see that all the speck disappears from this. This can be very useful when it comes to like art directing certain scenes, that one light you want to only be affecting the speck, and one light you want to only be affecting the diffuse. So very, very, very useful to go in and use these once in a while. So point light emulates essentially a light bulb. Next up, we have the spotlight, and the spotlight is emulating, you guessed it, a spotlight. The spotlight is very theatrical in a very real sense. This is what you'll be using often if you want to actually light something like a theater stage. Then this is fantastic. This is what we had just in the beginning of this video as well. So we can just put this up here like so, and it's going to be too dark. So there's not going to be anything here because we have to go under Arnold, and we just have to increase the exposure as well. Honestly, Arnold is quite simple when it comes to lighting like this. There are really only a few settings. You're dealing with the color of the light, you're dealing with the exposure and samples, and sometimes radius as well. So we can see this is far too bright. Looks pretty cool though, like this looks pretty epic, but we just want to make this a little bit darker. So try 13. Now you can see this is half the brightness, but it's still way, way too bright. So we can set this to like 10 and see what this looks like now. So now you can see that this looks pretty cool, but the shadow might be a little bit too strong, the border around it. Then we can go up here and we have 3 angles. We have the cone angle, which is how big the angle of this actually is. This is fantastic for like really like controlling the light. Sometimes you want to use this for just really controlling, getting more lights in certain spots. I do this sometimes if I have a whole scene like this and maybe the whole thing is properly lit, but I just want a little bit more focus on his face. I'm just going to pop in a spotlight and just light his face up a little bit more. This would not be, you wouldn't be using light link or anything for this. This would just be a light that's a little bit more targeted towards like maybe his face or something. So the cone angle is how wide the angle is. Then we have the penumbra angle. Penumbra is just shadow in Latin. I believe this is where the word umbrella comes from as well, from the umbra. And we can just change the angle here. This is just going to see here how much softer the angle actually becomes. And then we have the drop off as well, which is going to be how sharp this whole thing is going to be. This is basically like a fall off like this from the light. So this can be a really cool way to get a nice effect as well. So if you change the penumbra angle and the drop off, you can really see that you can very much art direct the light here. So you can really see how much control you have here and how you can just with a single spotlight create something that looks really cool. Then of course you can change the color temperature as well to be colder or warmer, or you can go in and just change the color itself. I tend to never really use intensity in Arnold. You can of course do it as well. This is perfectly valid. If you want to never deal with exposure, if that for some reason just doesn't work with your brain, then just stick with intensity. Sometimes stuff in 3D just doesn't stick with me and I just have to use another system. So if you just want to use exposure or only want to use intensity, entirely up to you, as long as you're consistent about it, because otherwise you get into a little bit of trouble, because then you're going to have some lights with exposure, some lights with intensity, and it's going to get quite messy. Also, as a heads up, decay rates doesn't really work in Arnold. This here has no effect whatsoever. This here simply means how fast is the light decaying. This is something you would have to do in other render engines where the light should always be set to quadratic, meaning that the light falls off in a quadratic manner so that the light gets a lot less intense as you're going further away. This is a basic legacy thing in the sense that the light would have the same intensity here as it would be here, which is not realistic because obviously light drops off. So this is essentially something that doesn't work at all in Arnold. So don't worry about decay rate whatsoever. If you have no idea what this is, don't worry about that. Arnold will handle the physics. So that's a spotlight for you. Next up, we have the area light, and this is where we're going to go into the Arnold menu now. So this is just Arnold, lights, and area lights. And this is a fully worthy Arnold light, and you can see this looks a little bit different here. We don't have the default Maya menu. Area lights is the light I use by far the most, but also I mostly deal with portraits and characters, so this is a very comfortable light to use. This is very similar to the light you'll be using in a photographic studio, like a traditional photo studio. And they're similar to the light boxes where you have a lamp here and then you have like a box around this. This is actually how we are lighting all our FlippedNormals videos. When I'm doing the podcast myself, there's a light here and then there's like a light box around it like so, which just means that the light goes in here and then it gets scattered around or diffused, so the light becomes very soft. We just have to increase the intensity or the exposure quite a lot here, so we can just set this to like 10, maybe 8, and you can see how nice and comfortable this lighting becomes. So you can just scale this up and scale this down. For this, the position, rotation, and the scale matters a lot. You can see here the light now is like medium turn size. If we make this bigger, you can see that the shadows are going to become a lot softer. The brightness doesn't actually change though, but the shadows do change a lot. So small light means sharp shadows, and big light means soft shadows, which is how it would be in real life as well. In the aforementioned light box scenario, if you have a bulb here and then you have a massive light box, this is going to produce very soft shadows. And if you have a very small light box, it's going to produce much harsher shadows. So the area light is the light I really use a lot. You can use this in so many different ways when it comes to lighting things. So we can just pop down this back here, and then you can like get some nice rim light and such on this statue here, and yeah, you can just control this in tons of different ways. One thing that is useful to know is the spread as well. If you just were to move this a bit closer to the floor, you can see a bit more what's going on here. So we just put this down here towards the ground and we scale it down. So we just move this a little bit closer now to just the floor. So the spread is how much the light is going to be spreading around. This is what it's currently doing. This is the light here, and if this is a pretty high value, it's going to be spreading like all around like this. So this is going to just create like really nice and soft shadows all around, and it's going to really spread a lot. And if we were to set the value low, then it would be like the light only goes like down like so. So let's have a look at this. If we set the spread low, you can see that this now shoots much further down like here. So a low spread is just a lot more parallel. And of course, again, these samples as well. We just have to increase this to around 3. So the spread can be really useful to when it comes to lighting scenes, because you can see how much more focused it becomes versus a high value. So sometimes you just want to use this to control the lights. And again, if this is too bright, then you just set this down and you can see how much darker this is going to get right away. If you set this to like 7 or like 6 again, like this. A little tip here is you can hold on the control key and then just while hovering over the field, you can just drag this left to right. You can really get these nice increments in this instead of it like going like crazy like this, where it goes from like 4 to like 10 in like a second. You can just really go in here and just drag this left to right. So this is really useful. So we can just go up here and we can just move this like so, and you can just see how the different effects of the different lights feel. But one of the issues with all these lights is that apart from the directional light we had, they all make the scene look quite dark because there's nothing here, and then we're just adding a single light to it. A lot of times when you're lighting, I would say nearly every single time you're lighting something, you want to have natural lighting in your scene, like from the environment. And the way you do this is by using an HDRI. Using HDRIs in Arnold from Maya is incredibly simple. You simply make a sky dome light, click this once, now you can see, boom. Now we have lights from everywhere. How this works is that there is a sphere around the whole scene now, which is massive, and it's not infinite large, so it does actually have a size, and it's going to currently be filled with just a color. So we can change this to anything else, and now you can see this changes. So how this works is that this sphere is just lighting up the whole scene. So from all these points, it's just going to light it up. So this means that you get very soft and very nice shadows. But the beauty of this is not that you can use a color, because that has very limited use cases. But the beauty is that you can map an image to this. So you can go under File, and then we can pop in an HDRI. And if we just pop in any one of these ones all come from Polyhaven. This is just a free site. We have no affiliation with these guys, but they do really good work. So you can just grab any one of these ones, perfectly free HDRIs. Just make sure they're set to raw, and now you can see you get these really nice realistic results. If you want to rotate it around, you can just select the light itself and just rotate this around. So you get very cool effects. You can see here, of course, this is being blocked by the background because, you know, that's how it works. If something is in the way, it's going to cast shadows. So this produces really nice and realistic results. If we, for instance, were to change this to be metal now, you can really start to see the reflections of this. No matter what you're lighting, I highly recommend you to start off with an HDRI, just as a bit of a base, even if you just want this to be like 0.1, just so you get a tiny bit of reflections in it, just to make it more natural. Particularly when doing characters, I find this to be useful. Well, I wouldn't even say particularly doing characters as well. I would say particularly doing anything that has reflections. This becomes very important. Then we can just go in here, we can just find different HDRIs. We can, like this one here is really nice. Just makes it look like it's just like a nice, beautiful sunset. We can go in and we can change this to a burnt warehouse, a bit more industrial here. And you can see how the light changes drastically. The disadvantage with using HDRIs is that you can't really control them. The image is what it is, and these images have been captured on site, so they are what they are. You can't really go in and change them. You could, in theory, put them, chuck them into Nuke or Photoshop and paint things out, but from a practical point of view, that's not really something you're going to be doing unless you really need that. But yeah, using HDRIs is incredibly simple, unlike looking at UBlender where it's not very simple, and you have so much control in this. So you have settings here like the intensity. You can also use color temperature as well, and you know, you just have a lot of settings. For the format, you want to stick to the lat long, granted that you have an HDRI from Polyhaven. Most of these are going to be lat long, but sometimes you're going to be using a mirrored ball as well. In this case, this is going to be crazy wrong because this is not a mirrored ball. A mirrored ball would be if the HDRI is actually shot into a mirrored ball, then you want that. And like with the other lights, you can also go in here and be like, you want this to not be visible in the diffuse. You want this only to be visible, for instance, in the specular. You can do that, or not visible in the specular. You can also do that as well. So this is what this looks like now without any reflections. One thing that's a bit different from this one is that this one here is visible in the camera. So if we were to hide the background now, just H for this, here we go. You can see this is now visible in the actual render. You really don't want this in most cases because the image is kind of crappy, right? It's like a low-res image. It's fine, but it's used for lighting. It's not supposed to be a background image. So in this case, you can just take this off and just set this to 0, and now you can still get your nice alpha here. So I always recommend that you comp this in something like Photoshop, Nuke, Fusion, whatever you prefer, and then you stick with that. So HDRIs, super nice and simple to deal with in Maya. So the last light we're going to be talking about is going to be the mesh light. The mesh light is a bit of a unique type of light because it actually uses a model as a light itself. So let's say we want to have some kind of light going around this character. We have actually made a little model here for you, which we just want to light with. So I'm just going to be hiding the, actually just deleting the HDRI, then we are using the mesh light. And I want the scene to be lit up by this shape here. This is incredibly handy if you have some like highly specific shape or something you just need to light with that you can't light with a traditional light. We simply just select our model, then we type mesh light, and then we just set the intensity to something like 10, see what happens here. And then if you want this to be visible, you can just say mesh visible. And if you want it to not be visible, well, you just uncheck it. And like with the other ones, you can use color temperatures. We can make this really red, really orange, really red, and you can see what happens now. So now this whole thing is going to be lit up using the mesh light. So this is really useful because it means you can fully control the scene, and you can also animate this mesh light here as well. So if you want something a bit stylized, like let's say you want this here to like snake around them somehow, right? That you want this to be animated so it just goes around, and this just changes based on that. You can really control this with a mesh light. You can also, of course, change the samples as well, like with the other ones, change the temperature, change the exposure, and so on, and of course change the values here. Here you can see we don't really have the in-camera as well because there's no point in having that. So some of these lights are a little bit different. And then of course you can combine all these lights in a myriad of different ways. So we can now just add a mesh light to light this up here. We can add an HDRI going in here, and we can just get like really nice effects like this. So we can go in here and let's find an HDRI this is pretty cool. So we can just combine these in tons of different ways. We can change the intensity here, but these are really the light types I use the most. There are of course more light types than this, and those are lights you're probably going to be using only like once in a while, like the photometric light here, the light portals. These are lights I don't really use. The physical sky as well I don't really tend to use, but tons of ways you can combine those. But those are more advanced lights. We can add a spotlight here, and then we can just go in here. We can just make this a little bit dramatic. Just add the intensity here, or change the exposure to something like 5. We can just see what happens if we make this a little bit bigger. So when you're lighting something like this, you always just pick the light type that you think would fit the best. There isn't really like the best light. This just depends entirely on your situation. Sometimes you just want a spotlight, sometimes you just want an area light. So this just depends a lot. Here I'm kind of doing what we were talking about before, where you can light something in a more of a specific manner. We can choose a light temperature here, color temperature, and just like blend this in a little bit. And yeah, tons of ways you can have fun with these kinds of lights. And after rendering for a little bit, this is what this looks like now. You can see there is a bit of noise in this. So the way you would fix this would be first going through the different lights and just making sure that we have enough samples. And then if that is not enough, then you probably just have to go in and just increase the overall samples here. The smart way, of course, would be to make different AOVs for this, so you can definitely see the different passes here, so you can just really be surgical about it. But oftentimes I kind of just go in and increase this. This depends, of course, entirely on what I'm rendering. So yeah, that's the introduction to lighting for Arnold. Just as a quick summary, we have the directional light, which is a sunlight. Then we have point light, which is a light bulb, spotlight, which is a spotlight used for theaters. And we have the area light, which is very similar to like a light box that you would have in a film set or something like that. And then we have the sky dome light, which is an HDRI, which is fantastic for simulating outdoor environments or just making your scene feel a lot more natural. So yeah, we'll see you in future videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.